Welcome to Loaded and Rolling. I'm your host, Thomas Wasson, and today's episode, we're going to go over a little bit of a freight market update. Super excited to have the folks on from TA Services. They had recently released its Transportation Trendline report, and so sometimes it's important to know where we're going. We have to look back a little bit to know where we came from. Let's dive in with our guest here. Super excited to be welcoming Jerad Dennis. He's the Director of Pricing and Business Intelligence at TA Service. And Jerad, super excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on today.
Tell us a little about your background first. Tell us kind of a little bit about what you do in TA Services, and then we will dive into the meat and potatoes, this report, and what the heck is going on.
Yeah, so I'm the VP of Pricing here at TA Services, and really my background is in brokerage. I've been in the industry now for over 20 years, and really on the carrier sales side led me to where I'm at today. Really helped with my market knowledge. Really, it's supply and demand. It's pretty simple when you boil it down, but that's what led me to where I'm at today, and pricing and truckload, LTL, consolidation, all the different modes.
Well, let's talk about that. Freight demand, it's all about supply and demand. And one of the fascinating things is, according to this report, demand had held steady in early June with slight dips post Memorial Day. But let's talk about that in terms of a broader context. How is it looking not only from the report, but from what you're kind of seeing on the ground, being in the trenches, about what we're looking at in terms of demand?
Yeah. So we've got the three different equipment types, main equipment types: van, reefer, flatbed. Seeing some slight variations in with flatbed compared to dry van and reefer. But yeah, for the most part, we saw kind of started out around that DOT Blitz week, middle of May, where we saw a nice peak then, where we typically do normal, see that every year, and that leads into Memorial Day and usually kind of kicks off the peak season. And it started out like we thought it would. We saw a nice increase, saw about a 15% increase in demand over what we typically do for that time of middle of May. But then following the Memorial Day holiday, the market really kind of underperformed compared to what it typically does. It didn't take off like we expected it to. It's been a slight year over year increase, really for all equipment types, but not as much as we were hoping for, at the beginning of the year.
It kind of feels like a hard knock life in the van sector. When we're looking at between van, reefer, flatbed, and some of these modes, are there any kind of clear winners? At least from my personal opinion, I feel like the largest being the dry van segment, they probably had it the hardest if you're trying to make money as a driver with spot market rates.
Sure, and that's where the most capacity is at, and that's been the name of the game the past couple of years, is just oversupply of capacity that's held on since the COVID years, and that's where the most capacity is at, is dry van, where reefer and flatbed are a little bit more of a specialized mode, and it has a little bit less capacity there. So we've seen a little bit more volatility in reefer and flatbed as we've seen some capacity come out of the marketplace. But dry van is probably been hit the hardest so far, and is really kind of, it hasn't seen as much volatility as what we'd normally see this time of year.
And looking ahead, kind of thinking about what this means for the rest of the summer, what do you normally typically see? Because it does look like the return of seasonality. What should we kind of expect as we are moving towards, at least in Tennessee, this has been a very hot and muggy summer. Weather's not been favorable. How about the weather for rates?
Oh, I can tell you weather in Indiana too. It's been hot and muggy, but the weather for rates has not been as hot as the weather here in Indiana. It's like I said, it's been a little bit better year over year. We've seen modest gains year over year, but we're still in a still in a soft rate environment, where contract rates, there's still pressure on contract rates. It's still a market where you have to be very aggressive in a contract to win and be awarded volume. And so, we haven't turned the corner yet as far as rates. Seen modest increases, but we're hoping for better weather next year.
And let's talk about this. Kind of ties into regionality, but I wanted to look at intermodal opportunities. There's some recent reporting done by the Journal of Commerce talking about how even intermodal carriers like JB Hunt had instituted surcharges. I think it was approximately $1,500 per container. There was also reports that in June there was a lot of shipments. Let's talk about the intermodal side as well, especially when we're looking at those LA ports and import volumes. What are y'all kind of seeing on the ground, and what does the report give us in terms of what could be causing some of these headlines?
Yeah, I read the same thing this morning. I think it came out yesterday that JB Hunt had instituted that I think $1,500 for anything over commitment. But yeah, it's imports. We obviously saw when tariffs were implemented that we saw a decrease in imports and specifically the West Coast. The pause announced at the beginning of May really kind of started a clock that 6 to 8 weeks from early May, so meaning mid to late June, we would expect to see an increase in imports and an influx of imports coming into the West Coast. And majority of those imports that came in definitely went on intermodal. There was some overflow for dry van market as well, for over the road market, but a lot of those imports went shipped via rail once they made it to the U.S. Starting to see that import volume decrease middle of July here. Volume is still relatively high at the first couple of weeks, but we are starting to see that forecasted volume to decrease mid to late July in imports, and would expect that to impact rail as well, intermodal, and start to see a slowdown, especially coming in from the West Coast then.
That was one of my bigger questions, was if there was going to be a glut of intermodal from the additional port activity, would any of it kind of spill over into truckloads? So from what it appears to be, since nobody's in a real big hurry and they're stockpiling inventory, they're perfectly fine letting it sit at a railhead and put it on a train, compared to trucking, which would hope that maybe we'll put it on a truck and pay a little more and get it there faster.
We did see some spillover. We have seen some spillover in the market. We've seen demand increase outbound from Southern California for over the road shipments. But majority of it, yeah, you're right. It's not in a rush. The biggest concern would be demurrage charges and storage charges on the container, on that intermodal container. But you can always transload that onto another container or transload it into a dry van to ship either intermodal or over the road.
And let's talk about some spot rate trends. I'm kind of curious about, we talked about some of the movement as well. We had our seasonal bumps. What about by regional? Is there some specific winners and losers when we're thinking of like Southeast, Northeast, Midwest for folks, or is it something kind of across the board at the moment?
Yeah, we mentioned seasonality earlier on, and we are seeing produce seasonality starting in May, and really about the same time as DOT Blitz Week. We saw produce season start up, and that's typically when it starts up and starts out down in Florida and southern Texas. Those markets were big winners early on, but those markets have really subsided as produce has shifted north into northern Texas, Georgia, the Carolinas are markets where we're starting to see some rate increases out of those markets, and we're seeing outbound rates soften out of southern Florida and those markets where produce has really that season is mostly over out of Florida right now.
And that's fascinating to watch it. If you look at a produce season growing map, it's almost like it starts at the bottom, and as things get ripe based on the latitude, it slowly happens. What are we looking at now? Kind of the seasonal dynamics. Where's the next spot for folks like myself who I always did like freight of all kinds. I didn't really do as much produce, but what do we look at next? We got Texas heating up. Does it like magically pop up to Idaho for potatoes, or do I have like the California strand in terms of stuff getting ready? What is the kind of the seasonal flow as we're thinking of moving in past this 4th of July bump? It's the middle of produce season, and then we're heading towards, I guess, the early stages of fall. What's kind of the scheme?
Yeah, so we have a month here where it's really going to be pretty quiet for the most part. It's you're going to have the produce shipping out of, like you mentioned, it's produce is ripe. It's time to pick it. It's time to get it on the road. So you're going to have that in the Carolinas right now, and that's going to shift north into Virginia and then Pennsylvania and make its way into the Midwest as well. But yeah, you also have California. That's where the most produce is grown in the U.S. is in California, and that's where the most produce volume ships out of. But then yes, you're looking at late Q3, early Q4. We're going to see the Pacific Northwest heat up with Idaho and east, especially eastern Washington, eastern Oregon. We're going to see produce coming out of those markets as well, and increase in demand and an increase in rates coming out of those markets.
Let's talk about some other seasonal things as well, because it's almost like now with the return to seasonal expectations, we almost have to look for the next big event. And so I'm looking at thinking about now that July 4th is passed, Memorial Day is passed. What is the next one when you're looking at it in terms of the upcoming peak seasons? Do we wait for like Labor Day? Do I wait for back to school? Is it Halloween, or is it usually just kind of like the whole Christmas thing and it goes all crazy for folks who are trying to catch up on when should we expect the next kind of bump?
There's not a magical time, and especially this year, we're looking at tariffs, and that's bringing some uncertainty into the market, and that's really going to impact the typical retail peak season that we would see coming up here in the next couple of months. We don't know what that impact is going to be yet. So we have uncertain tariffs and we have uncertain impact to the market. I would say that yes, we're going to have Labor Day weekend coming up, and that's going to be we are going to see a small event there. We'll see some volatility around Labor Day weekend, mostly around the dry van and reefer segments. Flatbed is into its softer season in the second half, and won't see as much of an impact around Labor Day weekend.
I always wondered
Following
with
that,
flatbed with that. Is it the boom or the bust cycle? When does flatbed get crazy and when does it cool?
it gets crazy typically late February, early March is usually when it's really on the upswing. You have January, which is a kind of a crazy market for all modes. You have the weather impact, and you have holidays and weather all coming into one, and typically, especially the past several years, I think it's going back 20 years. January used to be considered a slow month, but now it's January is we see rates spiked in January, and that's for all equipment types. But for flatbed, it really starts to pick up steam late February, early March, and that typically goes through building season through the end of June. This year we saw a little bit of an earlier peak with the tariffs, and an increase in steel demand really pushed up that peak season, and housing has been housing market's been relatively slow with interest rates being where they're at. So we haven't seen that typical spring building push. This year was more the spring aluminum and metals push that we saw this year. So I think that continues to prop up the market, especially with the domestic steel demand being what it is. We expect that to be a little bit better. Not, I don't think it's going to completely make up for the normal second half softness, but it might prop it up and should see some modest gains over where we were at last year.
You'll get a kick out of the steel and aluminum demand. I spoke with a large OEM and we asked about their exposure to these potential tariffs with raw materials. And they said, well, the cruel irony is that we do have contracts, both domestically and foreign. But the ones here domestically, if they found out that you raised it by 30%, they'll come back to you and say, man, I need like 25% more, but I'm going to cut you a deal because I like you. And it's like, you can't win. They're going to raise their prices too.
Steel really isn't. The end price really hasn't changed all that much, whether it's imported or whether it's domestic. Yeah, like you said, it's all supply and demand for all of our markets, whether it's truckload markets, whether it's steel markets. It's all supply and demand. And if they can raise their price 30%, they're going to be able to do that and pass that through.
I always have a soft spot for folks who broker flatbed. I had some flatbed accounts, and the worst were the steel coils because you'd have to tarp them and then you deliver them. But then sometimes the customer would forget about them and they start rusting and they try to file a claim against you. And it's like, no, I didn't do that. It sat on your lot for a while. And then they come back like 6 months later saying you ruined their coils. So me and raw materials, it's a different kind of hustle for sure.
It sure is. It's an interesting industry, that's for sure.
So I want to pick your brain about the cross-border market. We got a lot of activity, Texas, California, Arizona. What's kind of the deal with some of these lanes? What are some of the thoughts? I talk with people all the time. They're saying nearshoring's on the uptick. They're looking for CTPAT certified carriers. What's it like on that cross-border side as we're trying to navigate some of these larger uncertainties?
Yeah. So cross border again, it's an interesting market. We just recently an announcement of 30% tariffs on imports from Mexico, so that's going to have an impact there as well. But yeah, we're the nearshoring efforts have increased over the past several years. That's not just been this year. That's been several years in the making, and it really just continues to increase the imbalance between northbound and southbound shipments. We bring in more freight from Mexico than we ship down to Mexico, so that brings an interesting dynamic and trying to find capacity out of northbound shipping out of Mexico. And our team here, they are always continually building up our capacity out of Mexico and working with multiple carriers, whether it's in Mexico. We have a presence down in Monterrey, Mexico, and so we're working directly with Mexican carriers as well as with U.S. carriers with a Mexican presence. So it's an interesting market. I think everybody's always looking for northbound capacity is due to those imbalances.
I kind of wonder as well, is it the same thing as looking for like inbound to California or some of these bigger markets? Is that one of the bigger goals when you're looking for it? Or is it really specifically like a cross-border thing, like the giant black hole of one specific inbound or outbound flow?
Some of it's very specific because you have certain markets down there. You've got Monterey market. There's a lot of capacity in the Monterey market as compared to deeper south into Mexico, where you go into Mexico City and Puebla. In those markets, there's not as much capacity. It's not as many carriers are going to service that deep into Mexico. So it's Monterey is a market that's, while there's still the imbalance, that's a market where there's a decent amount of capacity northbound. But yeah, the further south you get, the more difficult it gets to find that capacity.
And looking at some broader outlooks as well, let's talk about some of the sustainability and technology. I think the sustainability piece is very fascinating. I talk with people, and one of the challenges is people just want to like measure out their emissions because shippers are in their RFPs wanting to be able to tell how much emissions they may be putting out, which is fascinating. Is that something that you all are seeing as well across the wire? Is there any cool sustainability or technology trends that you all have encountered? Especially even from that pricing side, where before in the past, a lot of this stuff wasn't added to RFPs and whatnot.
Uh, that has been more with kind of the OEM manufacturers and automotive. And not to say that there aren't other sustainability efforts going on, but from an RFP standpoint, those are the ones that are really looking for some answers there. And really, where we've been able to offer a solution there is LTL and freight consolidation. Just an example, we move freight down into Mexico. We consolidate freight in one warehouse in the Midwest, or we have several warehouses in the U.S. where we consolidate freight and then ship it down to Mexico on a truckload. And then from there, we deconsolidate it out to the destination. So that's where some of the biggest sustainability efforts are. I think sure you've got electric vehicles or you have the EV trucks, you've got the other types of fuel, alternative fuel vehicles out there as well. But those are very, very specialized equipment types. So
Yeah.
I think some of the biggest sustainability efforts are going to be, if you can consolidate freight, it's going to save time, save money, save on emissions. So those are going to be some of the biggest ones from what we're seeing.
It's fascinating to note that there was some recent study a few years back that they talked about how much is a full truckload being used. And so I was wondering about it because we see with our FreightWaves data that there's been year over year declines in truckload volume. So we're seeing losses in the full truckload space, but it's going into places like LTL or intermodal or rail. So I guess that's one of the sustainability things is just simply making sure if you're going to use a truck, you either fill it up or you parcel it out compared to the past where more people were just happy to get like a halfway or three-quarter loaded dry van trailer or something.
Yeah, for sure. That's a huge waste in shipping a half of a truckload. That can be consolidated either if the shipper has the freight to fill out the truck, or if they can wait maybe another couple days for production on the rest of on additional product to be put on that truck, or if they maybe they don't have that much time, but if the product can be consolidated with another shipment, maybe from another shipper, that's something that can also save on emissions, and ship that as a partial truckload, and it'll save some money, as well as saving on emissions.
Helping out, using a little bit, doing more with less is what I like to always say. Jared, thank you so much for hopping on the show. Unfortunately, we were running low on time, but if folks want to spend more time reaching out, checking out what TA Services does, or look at this recently released Transportation Trendline report, what's the best way for folks to get more information?
Free to reach out to us. They can reach out to myself, or I am on LinkedIn. You can find me there under my name, Jerad Dennis. But feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to talk. We do also on our website, taservices.com. There's also a contact link in there that'll direct you to get you directly to more of a sales level. I'm a pricing guy, so I'm not as personable as what a sales some of our commercial team would be, and they're a little bit better about talking through those opportunities. I get those opportunities, I price those out, but yeah, we'd love to talk to anybody else, anybody that wants to know a little bit more about us.
Yeah, perfect. Jerad, thanks so much for the opportunity to get to pick your brain as well. We'll definitely have to reconnect again soon.
For sure. Thank you.
That's going to be a wrap for this episode, but if you're just joining us, you can catch us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you need your podcast needs. While you're at it, sign up for some of our events. Check it out, live.freightwaves.com. We have some upcoming events. I don't have the time to read through all of them, but you do not want to miss them. And finally, subscribe to the Loaded and Rolling newsletter. That's freightwaves.com/loaded and rolling. Goes out Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. That's a wrap for this show. Thank you all so much for joining me. I'll see you again next week.